Every afternoon at 3:30, I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Martinez's Fighting Academy, my cleaning cartwheels squeaking against the polished concrete floor. The sound had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. For 18 months, I'd been the invisible woman who mopped their sweat, wiped their mirrors, and emptied their trash cans while they trained, laughed, and lived their dreams just feet away from me. My name is Sarah Chen, and I suppose you could say I was hiding in plain sight. 28 years old, 5'6", with calloused hands that spoke of years spent scrubbing and cleaning, but also of something else entirely. Something nobody bothered to notice because they'd already decided who I was the moment they saw me in my gray uniform, with Elite Cleaning Services embroidered on the pocket. The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and ambition. It was a scent I'd grown to love, even though I told myself I was just there to work. The late afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the mats where fighters practiced their craft. I'd watch them sometimes when I thought nobody was looking. The way they moved, the precision of their techniques, the mental chess match that happened in those split seconds before contact. I'd been studying martial arts since I was 12, but life had a way of derailing dreams. My father's medical bills, my mother's struggle to keep our family restaurant afloat, my younger brother's college tuition, they all took priority over my own ambitions. So I cleaned gyms instead of training in them, at least officially. But Martinez's was different. Coach Rodriguez, a former UFC fighter with graying temples and knowing eyes, had this policy about his cleaning staff. You want to stay after hours and use the equipment. That's between you and the mats. He'd told me on my first day, just don't break anything, and don't let insurance know. So while everyone else went home to their families, their dinners, their normal lives, I stayed. I rolled with the heavy bag until my knuckles bled through the tape. I practiced submissions on the grappling dummy until muscle memory took over. I shadowboxed in the mirror, perfecting combinations that nobody would ever see. The other fighters treated me like furniture, polite enough when they needed something cleaned, but otherwise invisible. There was Jake Morrison, the gym's golden boy, all charm and perfect technique. He'd been training here for 5 years, working his way up the amateur ranks with dreams of going pro. Then there was Maria Santos, the only other woman who trained regularly, a firecracker of a bantamweight who'd won 3 amateur titles but never seemed to notice me beyond asking for fresh towels. The worst was probably Derek Williams, a self-proclaimed street fighter who'd earned his black belt at some McDojo and thought it made him invincible. He had this way of looking through me, like I was just another piece of equipment to be cleaned around. When he did acknowledge my existence, it was usually to complain about something. The mats weren't clean enough, the mirrors had streaks, the water fountain needed refilling. But I watched them all. I studied their techniques, their weaknesses, their tells. Jake favored his right hand and dropped his left when he got tired. Maria was lightning fast, but sometimes left herself open when she pressed forward. Derek was strong, but relied too heavily on force, lacking the finesse that separated good fighters from great ones. The afternoon everything changed started like any other. I was running late because the morning shift at my second job had gone long. Some executive had spilled coffee all over his office and demanded it be cleaned immediately. I rushed through the gym doors at 4:15, already behind schedule, pushing my cart a little faster than usual. The usual suspects were there. Jake was working the heavy bag, his white G darkened with sweat. Maria was stretching in the corner, preparing for her evening session. A few other regulars were scattered around the mats, but there was someone new. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that spoke of years in the gym. His black belt was pristine, tied with the kind of precision that suggested military training or obsessive attention to detail. Everything about him screamed confidence, From the way he surveyed the room like he owned it, to the slightly amused smile that played at the corners of his mouth. "That's Marcus Thompson," I heard Maria whisper to Jake. "He just moved here from Chicago. Supposedly, he's got some serious credentials." I started my usual routine, beginning with the locker rooms and working my way out to the main floor. But I could feel this Marcus guy watching me, and not in the polite ignore the help way I was used to. There was something predatory about his gaze, like he was sizing me up for sport. I was mopping near the edge of the mats when he approached. The room wasn't quiet, but conversations seemed to dim as people sensed something was about to happen. Marcus stepped right up to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the clean scent of a fresh GI. "You," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of arrogance that comes from never being challenged. "You clean or you fight?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I felt every eye in the room turn toward us. Jake paused mid-combination on the heavy bag. Maria stopped her stretching. Even the conversations in the far corners of the gym seemed to fade. I looked up at him, this stranger who'd walked into my space and decided to make me his entertainment. There was something in his eyes that I recognized. The look of someone who'd always been told he was special, who'd never had to prove himself against someone who might actually surprise him. "Both," I said simply, my voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to course through my veins. The laughter started immediately. Not malicious exactly, but dismissive. The kind of laughter that comes from people who think they know exactly what they're looking at. Marcus's grin widened, and he turned to Jake like they were sharing some private joke. "Did you hear that?" Marcus called out to the room. "The cleaning lady thinks she can fight." More laughter. I felt my cheeks burn, but not with embarrassment, with something else. Something that had been building for 18 months of being invisible, of being overlooked, of being underestimated. Coach Rodriguez emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. He was a small man, maybe 5'7", but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven himself in the cage. His eyes took in the scene immediately. Marcus standing over me, the crowd gathering, the tension that was building like pressure in a cooker. "What's going on here?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. "Just having a little fun with the help," Marcus said. But there was something in his voice that suggested this wasn't just fun for him. This was a test, a way of establishing dominance in his new environment. Coach Rodriguez looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Not pity, not amusement, but something like recognition. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you want to warm up?" The gym went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from people stopping what they're doing, but the deep, profound silence that comes from people suddenly realizing they might have misjudged a situation completely. I set down my mop. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation, from the knowledge that 18 months of secret training, of staying late, of pushing myself when nobody was watching, was about to be put to the test. "I'd be happy to," I said, my voice carrying more confidence than I felt. Marcus was still grinning, but there was something different about it now, less certain. He looked around the room, perhaps expecting someone to tell him this was all a joke, but Coach Rodriguez was already moving toward the equipment room. "You'll need gear," Coach said to me. "There's a spare GI in the women's locker room. Size small should fit you." I nodded and headed toward the locker room, aware that every eye in the gym was following me. The GI was clean and pressed, hanging on a hook like it had been waiting for this moment. My hands trembled slightly as I changed out of my uniform, but as I tied the belt, my own black belt, the one I'd earned years ago but never had reason to wear here, I felt something shift inside me. When I emerged from the locker room, the gym had transformed. What had been a casual training session was now an event. People had stopped what they were doing and formed a loose circle around the main mat. Marcus was stretching, his movements fluid and confident. He'd removed his GI top, revealing a physique that spoke of serious training and natural athleticism. "You sure about this?" Coach Rodriguez asked me quietly as I approached the mat. I nodded, then bowed to the mat in the traditional way. Marcus did the same, but his bow was perfunctory, almost mocking. We faced each other in the center of the mat, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant traffic outside. "Touch gloves," Coach said, taking on the role of referee. We moved toward each other, and as our gloves touched, Marcus leaned in close. "I'll try to go easy on you," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Don't!" The first few seconds were a dance. Marcus circled me, bouncing on his toes, throwing lazy jabs to test my reaction. I stayed centered, moving minimally, watching his feet, his shoulders, his eyes. He was fast, but there was something theatrical about his movements, like he was performing for the crowd rather than fighting. He threw a quick combination, jab, cross, hook, and I slipped them all, my head moving just enough to avoid contact. I saw his eyes widen slightly, the first crack in his confidence. He reset, this time more serious, and came at me with a low kick aimed at my lead leg. I checked it with my shin, the sound of bone on bone echoing through the gym. He followed with a cross, and I ducked under it, stepping inside his range. For a moment we were chest to chest, and I could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. That's when I made my move. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand, and his elbow with my right, stepping through and dropping my hips. It was a basic hip toss, the kind of technique you learn in your first month of judo, but executed with 18 months of hidden practice behind it. Marcus flew through the air and landed hard on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The gym erupted, not with laughter this time, but with genuine shock. Someone whistled, someone else shouted, "Holy shit!" Maria was on her feet, her mouth hanging open. Marcus rolled to his feet quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments before. We reset, and this time there was no dancing. Marcus came at me hard, throwing an overhand right with real intent behind it. I rolled under it and shot for his legs, executing a clean double-leg takedown that put him on his back again. This time, I didn't let him up. I moved immediately to side control, my weight distributed across his torso, my arms controlling his head and far arm. He tried to bridge to create space, but I moved with him, staying heavy, staying connected. When he tried to turn toward me, I spun to north-south position, my body perpendicular to his, my weight pressing down on his chest. "Get off me," he grunted. But there was panic in his voice now. I could feel his desperation, the way his breathing had become labored, the way his muscles were starting to burn from the constant struggle. This was the part of fighting that most people never saw. Not the explosive moments of impact, but the slow, grinding chess match of position and pressure. He made a mistake then, reaching across his body to try to grab my GI. I immediately transitioned, spinning my hips and throwing my leg across his throat. My other leg hooked under his arm, and suddenly, I had him in a perfect triangle choke. The gym went silent again, but this was different. This was the silence of people witnessing something they hadn't expected, something that changed their understanding of what was possible. Marcus's face was turning red, his free hand slapping frantically at my leg. The triangle was tight, cutting off the blood flow to his brain. He had maybe 10 seconds before he'd lose consciousness. He tapped. Fast, desperate taps against my thigh, the universal signal of submission. I released the hold immediately, rolling away and standing up. Marcus lay on his back for a moment, gasping, his hand rubbing his throat. The gym remained silent, but it was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Then Coach Rodriguez started clapping. Slow, deliberate claps that echoed through the space. "Beautiful technique," he said, his voice carrying approval I'd never heard before. "Perfect setup, perfect execution." The spell was broken. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, voices overlapping in excitement and disbelief. Jake was shaking his head, grinning. Maria was laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy. Even some of the other fighters who'd barely acknowledged my existence were looking at me with something like respect. Marcus sat up slowly, his face a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something that might have been grudging respect. He looked at me for a long moment, then stood and bowed properly. "Good fight," he said, and this time his voice carried no mockery. I bowed back, then turned to address the room. "I've been training here for 18 months, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the space. "After hours, with Coach's permission. I wasn't hiding it, but I wasn't advertising it either." "Why?" Jake asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. I looked around the room at these people who'd been my silent companions for so long. "Because I was watching," I said. "Learning. Preparing." Coach Rodriguez stepped forward, his face serious. "Sarah's been working with me on her technique during the late shifts. She's got her black belt in judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, earned before she started working here. I've been wondering when she'd decide to show everyone what she could do." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. I wasn't just the cleaning lady who'd gotten lucky. I was a trained fighter who'd been studying them while they thought they were studying the art. "Why didn't you tell us?" Maria asked, and there was something like hurt in her voice. I considered the question, looking around at faces that were now seeing me for the first time. "Would you have believed me?" I asked finally. "Or would you have thought I was just someone who cleaned your gym and had delusions of grandeur?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Over the next few days, everything changed. Marcus, to his credit, didn't disappear in shame. Instead, he approached me the next afternoon as I was finishing my cleaning duties. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice lacking the arrogance that had characterized our first meeting. "I made assumptions about you, and I was wrong." I looked up from where I was wiping down the mirrors. "We all make assumptions," I said. "The question is what we do when we realize we're wrong." He nodded, considering this. "I was wondering if you might be interested in training together sometime. I could use someone to keep me humble." I smiled at that. "I might be interested. But first, help me finish cleaning these mirrors. It's still my job." He picked up a spray bottle without complaint, and we worked in companionable silence for a while. Jake's transformation was more gradual. He started nodding when I walked past, then began asking questions about technique. "That triangle you caught Marcus in," he said one afternoon. "How did you know he was going to reach across like that?" "I'd been watching you all for months," I explained. "Everyone has patterns, tells. Marcus leads with his ego, and ego makes you grab for things you shouldn't." "What about me?" he asked. "What are my tells?" I considered whether to tell him the truth. "You drop your left hand when you're tired, and you favor your right leg when you're backing up." His eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Seriously. But knowing it and fixing it are different things." Maria was perhaps the most interesting case. She'd been the only other woman training regularly, and I think my revelation both excited and threatened her. She approached me a week after the incident. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I should have made more of an effort to talk to you." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "We're all just trying to get through our days." But we could have been friends," she said. "We could have been training partners." I looked at her, this fierce woman who dominated her division in amateur competition. "We still could be," I said. That conversation led to the most rewarding training partnership I'd ever had. Maria pushed me in ways that solitary practice never could. She was faster than me, more explosive. But I had advantages too. Better ground game, superior technique in the clinch, and the kind of patience that comes from years of waiting for the right moment. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Coach Rodriguez treated me. The day after my impromptu match with Marcus, he called me into his office. "I have a proposition for you," he said, settling behind his desk. "I've been thinking about adding a women's program to the gym. Nothing fancy, just a few classes a week, maybe some private lessons. I think you'd be perfect to help me run it." I stared at him. "You want me to teach?" "I want you to do what you've been doing all along," he said. "Watch, learn, and help others prepare. The only difference is now you'd be getting paid for it instead of paying for the privilege." The offer was tempting, but I had practical concerns. "I still need my cleaning job," I said. "The insurance, the steady income. Keep it," he said. "This would be evening work after your regular shift. Think of it as a way to transition into something different if you want to." I thought about it for 3 days. The idea of teaching, of sharing what I'd learned, was appealing. But more than that, it represented a chance to step out of the shadows, to own my expertise instead of hiding it. "I'll do it," I told him on Friday afternoon. The women's program started small. Maria was my first student, though she already knew most of what I could teach her. She was there more for moral support than instruction. Then came Jessica, a college student who'd been wanting to try martial arts but felt intimidated by the male-dominated environment. After her came Ruth, a nurse who worked nights and wanted to learn a self-defense. Word spread slowly but steadily. Within 2 months, I was teaching 3 classes a week and taking on private students. The cleaning job remained my primary income, but for the first time in years, I was building something that felt like a career rather than just a job. The dynamics in the gym shifted too. I was no longer invisible, no longer just the woman who cleaned up after everyone else. I was Sarah, the coach who could teach you how to escape a triangle choke or set up a perfect hip toss. I was someone whose opinion mattered, whose expertise was valued. Marcus became one of my most dedicated students. The humility he'd discovered that first day had stuck, and he approached training with a new seriousness. He was still confident, still skilled, but now he was also curious, willing to admit when he didn't know something. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me one evening as we worked on escapes from side control, about watching and learning and preparing. I realized I've been so focused on being seen that I forgot to pay attention to what I was seeing. I adjusted his position, showing him how to create the proper frames to prevent me from advancing. "Being seen has its place," I said. "But being aware is more important." He nodded, practicing the movement slowly. "I keep thinking about how long you were here before any of us really noticed you. How much you must have learned about us before we learned anything about you." "What do you think I learned?" I asked. He paused, considering. "That most of us are more fragile than we pretend to be. That we're all trying to prove something, even when we're not sure what it is." I smiled at that. "And what do you think I was trying to prove?" "That you belonged here," he said without hesitation. "That you were more than what people saw when they looked at you." "And did I prove it?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me. The way he should have that first day. "You didn't prove it," he said. "You just revealed it. It was always true. We just weren't paying attention." That conversation stayed with me for weeks. The idea that I hadn't changed, that I'd simply become visible, was both comforting and unsettling. It meant that all those months of feeling invisible hadn't been about me at all. They'd been about girl or that he people's assumptions, their blind spots, their inability to see past their own preconceptions. But it also meant that I'd been complicit in my own invisibility. I'd chosen to stay in the shadows, to let people underestimate me, to build my skills in secret rather than demanding the recognition I deserved. The realization came to me gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape you thought you knew. I'd been so focused on preparing for the moment when I'd be tested that I'd forgotten to prepare for the moment when I'd be accepted. Success, it turned out, was more complicated than I'd imagined. The gym became a different place for me, where once I'd moved through it like a ghost. Now I was a fixture, a presence that shaped the energy of the space. New students sought me out for advice. Experienced fighters asked me to watch their training and offer feedback. Coach Rodriguez began consulting me on decisions about the gym's direction. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I saw myself. For years I'd defined myself by what I wasn't. Not a fighter, not a coach, not someone whose opinion mattered. Now I was discovering who I actually was, and it was both thrilling and terrifying. The first time someone introduced me as Sarah, one of the coaches here, I felt a jolt of recognition. Not surprise exactly, but acknowledgement. Yes, I thought. That's who I am. The cleaning job began to feel different, too. What had once been a source of quiet shame, the thing that marked me as different, as lesser, became simply one aspect of my life. I was still the person who mopped the floors and cleaned the mirrors, but I was also the person who could teach you to escape a rear naked choke or set up a perfect armbar. The duality didn't bother me anymore. If anything, it gave me perspective that pure fighters lacked. I understood the gym from every angle, as a workspace, as a training ground, as a community. I knew which corners collected the most dust, and which techniques were most effective in close quarters. I could clean a cut and teach a combination with equal skill. One evening, about 3 months after my impromptu match with Marcus, I was working late, cleaning the locker rooms after the evening classes. The gym was empty except for the security lights, and I was enjoying the quiet solitude when I heard the front door open. I emerged from the locker room to find Derek Williams, the self-proclaimed street fighter who'd always been particularly dismissive of me. He was standing in the middle of the main mat, still in his street clothes, looking lost. "Derek," I called out. "Everything okay?" He turned toward me, and I was surprised to see something like vulnerability in his expression. "Sarah," he said, and there was none of his usual arrogance. "I was wondering if I could talk to you." I set down my cleaning supplies and moved toward him. "Sure. What's on your mind?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking around the gym like he was seeing it for the first time. "I've been thinking about what happened with Marcus," he said finally. How you handled him. What about it? I realized I've been acting like him. Like Marcus did that first day. Arrogant, dismissive, thinking I already knew everything I needed to know. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or mockery, but found only genuine discomfort. "It's not easy to admit when we've been wrong," I said carefully. "I want to learn," he said suddenly. "Not just techniques, but how to really see what's happening, how to watch and learn the way you do." The request surprised me. Derek had always been so certain of his own abilities, so resistant to instruction. "What changed your mind?" He looked down at his hands. "I sparred with Jake yesterday. He caught me in a choke, and as I was tapping out, I realized he'd been setting it up for 30 seconds. I'd seen the setup happening, but I hadn't understood what I was seeing. I kept thinking about how you watched all of us for months, learning our patterns, our weaknesses. And you want to learn how to do that? I want to learn how to pay attention," he said. "Really pay attention. Not just to what I want to see, but to what's actually there." I considered his request. Training Derek would be challenging, not because he lacked skill, but because he'd have to unlearn years of bad habits and inflated confidence. But there was something in his manner that suggested he was ready for that challenge. "It's not easy," I warned him. "Learning to really watch means acknowledging how much you don't know. It means being wrong a lot before you start being right." "I'm tired of being wrong and not knowing it," he said. "I'd rather be wrong and learning than wrong and clueless." We started working together the next week. Derek was a difficult student, not because he was resistant to instruction, but because he was so eager to prove he was learning that he kept rushing ahead of his understanding. I had to teach him to slow down, to observe without immediately judging, to sit with uncertainty until clarity emerged. "You're trying to solve the puzzle before you've looked at all the pieces," I told him during one particularly frustrating session. "Fighting isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions." Gradually, he began to understand. I watched him transform from someone who fought with his ego to someone who fought with his intelligence. He was still aggressive, still powerful, but now his aggression was targeted, his power applied with precision rather than hope. The change in Derek seemed to inspire others. Jake approached me about working on his defensive habits. Maria asked me to help her understand how to read opponents' fatigue patterns. Even Marcus, who'd already made significant progress, wanted to dive deeper into the mental aspects of fighting. I found myself in the unexpected position of being the gym's go-to person for tactical analysis. Fighters would ask me to watch their sparring sessions and point out patterns they couldn't see themselves. I became the translator between what was happening and what it meant. The role suited me in ways I hadn't expected. Teaching technique was satisfying, but helping people understand the deeper strategic elements of fighting felt like my true calling. I was good at seeing the connections between seemingly unrelated events, at recognizing the subtle tells that preceded major developments. Coach Rodriguez began featuring my insights in his own instruction. "Sarah noticed something interesting about your footwork," he'd say to a student, then explain how my observations could improve their performance. I was becoming integral to the gym's culture, not just as a teacher, but as a strategic resource. But the most rewarding moments came from my women's program. The class had grown to include a dozen regular students, ranging from complete beginners to experienced athletes from other sports. Watching them develop confidence, seeing them discover their own strength, reminded me why I'd fallen in love with martial arts in the first place. There was something particularly satisfying about teaching other women the skills I'd had to learn in secret. They didn't have to hide their training or prove themselves through ambush demonstrations. They could learn openly, make mistakes without judgment, and develop their abilities in a supportive environment. "You're creating something important here," Maria told me one evening as we watched the women's class work on escape techniques. "These women are learning more than just fighting. They're learning that they don't have to accept other people's assumptions about who they are." I looked at the class, at women of all ages and backgrounds working together, supporting each other, pushing each other to improve. "Maybe that's what I was really preparing for," I said. "Not the moment when I'd have to prove myself, but the moment when I could help others prove themselves." The first anniversary of my match with Marcus arrived without fanfare. I was cleaning the gym after the evening classes when he approached me, a small wrapped package in his hands. "What's this?" I asked, accepting the gift. "Just something I thought you might like," he said, suddenly looking embarrassed. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small plaque that read, "Sarah Chen, Coach, Fighter, Truth Teller." Below the text was an engraving of two fighters bowing to each other. "Truth Teller?" I asked, touched by the gesture. "That's what you did that day," he said. "You told the truth about who you were, even when it was uncomfortable for everyone else to hear it. I ran my fingers over the engraving, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. "I don't know if I told the truth," I said finally. "I think I just stopped hiding it." "Maybe that's the same thing," he said. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone home and I'd finished my cleaning duties, I sat alone in the gym, looking at the plaque. The space was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the distant sound of traffic outside. I thought about the woman who'd walked into this gym 18 months ago, invisible and overlooked, carrying skills and knowledge that no one bothered to discover. I thought about the moment when that invisibility had been shattered, when assumptions had been challenged, when the truth had finally emerged. But mostly I thought about what came next. The teaching, the learning, the ongoing process of becoming fully visible, not just to others, but to myself. The realization that preparation wasn't just about building skills. It was about building the courage to use them. I stood up and walked to the center of the main mat, the same spot where I'd faced Marcus a year ago. But this time, I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I didn't have to earn my place in the world. I just had to claim it. The gym would open again tomorrow, and I'd be here, mop in hand, ready to clean the floors and teach the classes and help people discover their own truths. I'd be visible in all the ways I'd chosen to be invisible before, comfortable in my own skin and my own story. Because I wasn't just cleaning the floors anymore. I was building a life, one honest moment at a time. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem possible. I walked into Martinez's fighting academy at my usual time, but something was different. The space felt more like home than workplace, more like a place where I belonged than a place where I was tolerated. Jake was already there, working on his footwork in front of the mirrors. He looked up when I entered and smiled. Not the polite smile of someone acknowledging the help, but the genuine smile of a teammate greeting a colleague. "Morning, coach," he said, and the title felt natural coming from his lips. "Morning, Jake. How's that left hand coming along?" He threw a few combinations, keeping his guard up even as he extended his right. "Better, I think. Maria's been helping me drill it." I watched his form, noting the improvements and the areas that still needed work. "Much better. You're still telegraphing the right cross a little, but the defensive improvement is significant." He nodded, absorbing the feedback without defensiveness. That was another change. The fighters here had learned to receive criticism as a gift rather than an insult. It was a shift in culture that went beyond technique, touching something deeper about how we related to each other and to the process of improvement. As the morning progressed, other fighters filtered in. Each one acknowledged me, not with the perfunctory politeness of the past, but with the genuine respect of people who'd learned to see me clearly. Derek nodded and asked about his evening session. Maria waved from where she was wrapping her hands. Even some of the newer students, people who'd joined after my coming out moment, treated me with a deference that still felt slightly surreal. But the most meaningful change was in how I moved through the space. Where once I'd tried to make myself small, to avoid drawing attention, now I occupied the gym with the confidence of someone who belonged. I cleaned efficiently but without hurry, pausing to offer advice or answer questions without feeling like I was overstepping boundaries. During the lunch break, Coach Rodriguez called me into his office. "I've been thinking about expanding the women's program," he said without preamble. "Maybe adding a competitive team, working towards some amateur tournaments." I felt a flutter of excitement. "Do you think we're ready for that?" "I think you're ready for that," he corrected. "The question is whether you want to take on that level of responsibility." The idea was tempting. I'd been working with several women who showed real competitive potential, and the thought of helping them test their skills in actual competition was appealing. But it would also mean stepping further into the spotlight, taking on more visibility and accountability. What would that look like? I asked. You'd be the head coach for the women's team. Handle training, strategy, corner work during fights. It would be a significant time commitment, but it would also come with a significant increase in pay. Enough that you might not need the cleaning job anymore. The offer hung in the air between us. For years, I'd dreamed of making a living from martial arts, of being able to focus entirely on fighting and teaching. Now that possibility was within reach, but it also meant leaving behind the identity that had defined me for so long. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, but don't think too long. I'd like to have everything in place before the new year. I spent the rest of the day in a state of contemplation. The cleaning routine that had once been monotonous now felt meditative, giving me space to process the opportunity and its implications. By evening, I'd made my decision. I found Coach Rodriguez in his office after the last class. I want to do it, I said. But I want to keep cleaning too, at least part-time. He looked surprised. You don't have to. I know, I interrupted. But this place has been my home for 2 years. Cleaning it is part of how I stay connected to it. I don't want to lose that. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think I understand. You want to keep both parts of who you are. Exactly. The cleaner and the fighter. They're not separate identities. They're both me. We worked out the details over the following weeks. I would continue cleaning 3 mornings a week, focusing on deep maintenance tasks that didn't interfere with training schedules. The rest of my time would be dedicated to coaching, both the regular women's classes and the new competitive team. The transition felt natural, like I was finally becoming the person I'd always been meant to be. The first fighter I recruited for the competitive team was Jessica, the college student who'd been one of my earliest students. She had natural athleticism, and more importantly, the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught. You really think I could compete? She asked when I approached her about joining the team. I think you could do more than compete, I said. I think you could excel, but it's not about what I think. It's about what you're willing to commit to. She was quiet for a moment, considering. What made you decide to compete? I mean, to reveal that you could fight. I thought about the question, about that moment when Marcus had forced my hand. I realized I was tired of being afraid of my own strength. I said, I'd spent so long hiding what I could do that I'd forgotten why I'd learned to do it in the first place. And why did you learn? Because I could. Because it was beautiful. Because it made me feel like the most authentic version of myself. Jessica joined the team the next day, and her commitment inspired others. Within a month, I had 6 women training seriously for competition, each bringing their own strengths and motivations to the process. Training a competitive team was different from teaching recreational classes. The focus was sharper, the expectations higher, the emotional investment deeper. These women weren't just learning self-defense or getting in shape. They were preparing to test themselves against other skilled fighters, to put their abilities on display in the most vulnerable way possible. I drew on everything I'd learned during my months of observation, helping each fighter understand not just techniques, but strategies. Not just what to do, but when and why to do it. We worked on reading opponents, managing adrenaline, maintaining focus under pressure. The first tournament was scheduled for early spring. As the date approached, I felt a familiar nervousness. Not about the competition itself, but about being truly seen. Cornering fighters meant being visible in a way I'd never been before, having my coaching abilities evaluated publicly, taking responsibility for other people's success or failure. You're overthinking it, Maria told me during one of our training sessions. She'd become not just a student, but a close friend. Someone who understood the complexities of being a woman in a male-dominated sport. Am I? I asked, adjusting her stance as we worked on takedown defense. "You've been preparing for this your whole life," she said. "Not just the coaching part, but the being seen part. You know what you're doing. Trust yourself." The tournament was held at a community center about an hour away. I arrived early with my team, my coaching credentials freshly laminated, my nerves humming with anticipation. The venue was filled with fighters from gyms across the region, a mix of experienced competitors and nervous newcomers. Jessica was scheduled to fight first, and I could see the tension in her shoulders as she warmed up. "Remember," I told her as we worked on her pre-fight routine, "you've been preparing for this moment for months. Everything you need is already inside you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "What if I freeze up? What if I forget everything we've worked on? Then you'll remember it again," I said simply. "Fighting isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Stay in the moment, trust your training, and let yourself fight." When her name was called, I walked with her to the edge of the competition area. The referee checked her gear, confirmed her weight class, and gestured for her to enter the ring. As she stepped onto the mats, I felt a surge of pride and protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. "You've got this," I called out, and she looked back at me with a smile that was equal parts fear and determination. The fight was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Jessica started tentatively, feeling out her opponent, but as the first round progressed, she began to find her rhythm. I watched her apply techniques we'd drilled hundreds of times, saw her recognize patterns we'd studied on video, witnessed her make split-second decisions that reflected months of preparation. In the second round, she caught her opponent with a beautiful hip toss, the same technique I'd used on Marcus over a year ago. The takedown led to a dominant position, and from there, Jessica worked methodically toward a submission. When her opponent tapped to an armbar, I found myself cheering louder than I'd ever cheered for anything in my life. "Coach!" Jessica shouted as she left the ring, running toward me with her medal. "Did you see that? Did you see the way she walked right into it?" I had seen it. More than that, I'd seen Jessica become the fighter I'd always known she could be. "You were perfect," I told her. And I meant it. The rest of the tournament went equally well. 4 of my 6 fighters won their divisions, and the 2 who didn't lose fought with heart and skill that made me proud regardless of the outcome. But more importantly, I discovered something about myself in the process. Coaching felt like coming home, not just the technical aspects, but the whole experience, the preparation, the strategy, the emotional investment, the shared joy of success, and the shared lessons of defeat. I'd found my calling, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. The drive back to the gym was filled with excited chatter from the team, replaying fights and planning for future tournaments. I listened with half an ear, my mind already moving toward the next phase of preparation, the adjustments we'd need to make, the new challenges we'd face. But underneath the strategic thinking was something deeper, a sense of completion, of having found my place in the world. I wasn't just the woman who cleaned the gym anymore, but I wasn't just the coach either. I was both, and the combination made me stronger than either identity alone. When we arrived back at Martinez's, the gym was dark, except for the security lights. I unlocked the door and flipped on the main lights, and the familiar space welcomed us back. The team scattered to change and collect their things. But I lingered on the main mat, looking around at the place that had been my laboratory, my sanctuary, my secret training ground. "Thank you," I said quietly to the empty space, "for keeping my secrets, for teaching me patience, for showing me that preparation and opportunity aren't separate things. They're the same thing, seen from different angles." Jessica appeared beside me, still wearing her medal. "Coach, are you okay?" I smiled at her, this young woman who trusted me with her dreams and allowed me to guide her toward her own moment of truth. "I'm perfect," I said. "We're all perfect." Over the following months, the competitive team grew and evolved. Word spread about our success, and fighters from other gyms began asking about training opportunities. I found myself not just coaching, but recruiting, not just teaching, but inspiring, not just preparing individuals, but building a community. The women's program expanded to include advanced classes, specialty workshops, and regular sparring sessions. We hosted other teams for training camps, traveled to tournaments across the state, and developed a reputation for producing skilled, well-prepared fighters. But perhaps the most significant development was the change in the gym's overall culture. The presence of a strong women's program had attracted more female members, and their participation had created a more inclusive, supportive environment for everyone. The casual sexism that had once been commonplace was now called out and corrected. The assumption that women were somehow less serious about training had been thoroughly debunked. I still cleaned the gym 3 mornings a week, but now it felt like a choice rather than a necessity. I'd kept the routine because it grounded me, because it reminded me of the journey I had taken to get here, because it was part of who I was. But I no longer felt invisible while doing it. In fact, new students often sought me out during my cleaning time, knowing it was a good opportunity to ask questions or get advice. The mop bucket had become a mobile office, and I'd learned to balance coaching conversations with maintenance tasks. "It's like you're blessing the space," Maria observed one morning, watching me clean the mirrors while explaining defensive concepts to a new student. "Making it ready for the next person's journey." I liked that interpretation. The gym had been my classroom, my laboratory, my sanctuary. Now it was all of those things for other people too, and I was helping to maintain that possibility. The second anniversary of my match with Marcus passed with more fanfare than the first. The gym threw a small celebration, and several fighters gave speeches about what my example had meant to them. Marcus himself spoke about the importance of being willing to be surprised, to have your assumptions challenged, to recognize excellence even when it comes from unexpected sources. Sarah taught me that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who looks the most intimidating, he said. It's the one who's been watching, learning, and preparing while you've been busy being impressed with yourself. I accepted the recognition with mixed feelings. Part of me was proud of what I'd accomplished, of the community I'd helped build, of the fighters I'd helped develop. But another part of me was aware that the real victory wasn't in the moment I'd submitted Marcus. It was in all the quiet moments that had led up to it, all the hours spent preparing when no one was watching. "I keep thinking about what you said that first day," I told the gathering. "About cleaning or fighting. I said I did both, and everyone laughed because they thought it was a contradiction. But I've learned that they're not opposites. They're complementary. Both require attention to detail. Both require patience. Both require the willingness to do the work, even when no one is watching." I paused, looking around at faces that had become familiar, at people who'd become friends and colleagues and extended family. The real lesson isn't that I could fight despite being a cleaner. It's that I could fight because I was a cleaner, because I'd learned to see what needed to be done and do it without waiting for permission or recognition. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, but what meant more to me were the conversations that happened afterward. Fighters thanking me for changing their perspective, students asking for advice about their own hidden talents, colleagues acknowledging the value of the work I'd been doing all along. As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, I found myself alone with Coach Rodriguez. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about that first day you walked in here. I could see something in you, but I wasn't sure what it was. I certainly didn't expect this. What did you see? I asked. Hunger, he said immediately. Not the desperate kind, but the patient kind. The kind that can wait for the right moment but never stops preparing for it. And now I see someone who's found her place in the world. Not the place other people made for her, but the place she made for herself. I nodded, understanding what he meant. The gym had become more than a workplace or even a training facility. It had become a home in the truest sense, a place where I was known and valued for who I actually was, rather than who people assumed me to be. But as I looked around the familiar space, I realized that my journey was far from over. The competitive team was growing, new challenges were emerging, and there were still skills to develop, students to teach, and battles to fight. The difference was that now I faced those challenges from a position of strength rather than invisibility. I picked up my mop bucket and began my final cleaning sweep of the evening. The routine was automatic now, muscle memory guiding my movements, while my mind wandered to tomorrow's training plans, next month's tournament schedule, next year's goals. But as I worked, I was aware of the continuity between this moment and that first day, 18 months ago, when I'd walked into Martinez's fighting academy with nothing but a job application and a secret dream. The mop was the same. The floors were the same. The mirrors still needed cleaning. What had changed was me. Not in any dramatic overnight transformation, but in the gradual, patient way that real change happens, through consistent effort, honest self-assessment, and the willingness to be seen for who you really are. I was still the woman who cleaned the gym, but now I was also the woman who coached the fighters, who built the community, who stood in the corner during competitions and whispered encouragement to nervous athletes. I was all of these things, and the combination made me stronger than any single identity could have. As I finished cleaning and prepared to lock up for the night, I took one last look around the gym. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to grow and learn and teach. But tonight, I was content with the knowledge that I'd found my place in the world and claimed it with both hands. I wasn't just cleaning the floor anymore. I was building a legacy, one honest moment at a time. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was finally ready to embrace. And I would meet it the same way I'd met every challenge since that first day, by watching, learning, and preparing for whatever came next. Because that's what fighters do. That's what coaches do. That's what women who refuse to be invisible do. We prepare. We persist. We prevail. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to help others do the same.